Hello there. So in this tutorial we're going to talk about how to make the ship fire bullets, and then we're going to handle collisions. That means we're going to work out how to make the bullets destroy enemies, and then also how we're going to make the player be able to collide with enemies too. So let's start with bullets. So I'm going to hide my background here. So just to show where the game's up to, so we have enemies coming down the screen. I can move the player, but that's it. I can't shoot anything. I can essentially just move. I also can't hit the enemies. They just pass through each other. So let's start with bullets. If we want to make a bullet, we want to make it that we can press the spacebar and bullets shoot out. But the way this works is that we consider bullets to be an actor, like the player and like enemies. Such that bullets follow their own logic, and they basically make their own calculations, I suppose. So we're going to go into blueprint classes, and we're going to make a new blueprint. I'm going to go to add new, going to go to blueprint class, and I'm going to choose actor. And we're going to call this bullet. Going to double click on it. We're going to follow essentially the same process we did when we made the enemy. I'm going to make a new scene root. So I'm going to look for scene, choose it here. I'm going to just drag that over this one, and we'll rename that, there it is, to root. Whatever you like it to be, that's just to be clear, this is the one at the beginning. We're then going to go to add paper flipbook, like this, and we'll call this bullet flipbook, and then we'll choose an image for it. So if I've added some general bullets under suggested bullets, or suggested bullet more specifically, and then you can have a look and see if there's one that you like. I'm going to just choose the blue one, and there we go. Now we get this nice blue image here. Now we also need something to detect the collisions for later. So we're going to add a sphere collision. By the way, there are lots of different collision shapes. There's box collision, capsule collision, sphere collision. Often you will choose different collision shapes for depending on what kind of object you're trying to detect. We're going to stick with sphere collision for simplicity, but you're welcome to have a look at some of these if you like. I'm going to choose sphere collision, and we'll leave that there. Now, I can't remember if I named that something different on the enemy. I'm just going to quickly open the enemy up and see what I named it. I called it sphere collision. So we might, I'll close that for now. We might do that on the bullet too, just to keep the naming consistent. So I'm going to call that sphere collision, just so we remember what it does. Okay, now, this detects where the bullet will detect collision. So to give an idea, if I were to just drag this bullet onto the screen for a moment, so this sphere represents the points it will detect being hit. So if an enemy comes, say, within this close to it, and these two spheres collide, that will count as a collision, which we don't really want. That's a little bit too big. We want that sphere to match it a bit better. So we're going to go back to the bullet with the sphere collision selected. I'm going to drag it down. Now I'm just going to select these two. That'll be fine for what I'm doing. And I'll get it roughly the same size. I'm also going to move it up to the tip around there will do. Now, by the way, by default, this button is on, which means that it always moves in like increments of 10. If you want to be more precise, turn off this grid button, and it means you can move it more smoothly, which is what I had on. I'm also going to turn off this one. This just means that when I scale it, it will be a bit more precise also. Normally it kind of snaps to certain amounts. This just means I can be a bit smoother with it. So if I turn this on again, see how it like snaps to different sizes. Turning this off just means we can do it a little bit smoother. So let's do it to about there. If you need a bit more precision, you can always change the scale values here to find one that you like. Now, by the way, you don't necessarily have to make this exactly on. You could make it a bit bigger if you want. It just means that the bullets will detect a bit more easily. It's quite common in a lot of games for them to make the collision meshes a bit bigger than what they represent. Most games, people will talk about this as the hitbox because using boxes is a common way of doing this. We've just got a sphere in this case. So I'm going to make mine a little bit bigger. I'm going to make mine maybe that big. So it's a tiny bit bigger than what my actual thing is. Just select that again so you can see that clearly. Yeah, a little bit bigger. That'll be fine. I'm going to go to compile that. Okay, so now we can see here, this is how much it'll detect by this sphere here. So that's pretty good. Going to remove this one, so because we don't want to actually just have it start there by default. Okay, so now we need to make it possible for the player to shoot it. We're going to come back and make some changes to the bullet, but now we want to actually put in the shooting mechanism. So if we select the player, we can go to its blueprint here. We have all of our movement controls from what we had last time. So I'm going to search for, or we can search for it, or I can just go to input. I might do that because that just gives me a bit of a more complete list. Go to input, keyboard events. Let's find spacebar. There we go. So now I get my spacebar control here. So now that I've got my spacebar, I want to put in effectively like an action for shooting it. So I'm going to search for spawn actor from class, because that's exactly what we're doing. We are spawning the bullet when we press spacebar. Connect that up. Choose my class. So in this case, I want to find the bullet. So I'm just going to search for bullet, and here it is. Now, one of the note is this orange pin represents move, rotate, and scale all in one package. And it actually needs one by default. There are two ways we could do this. We could say give it a value, so we can, there's ways of making a transform. But the easy way would be to right click, go split struct pin, and then that will release the transform, sorry, the location, rotation, and scale kind of values here. And this will essentially give it values of 0 to use by default. So let's just test this. I'm going to compile it. I'm going to start my game. Now I press spacebar, and notice I get a bullet in the middle of the screen. Don't stress, that's what should happen at this point. We haven't really told it to fire from the player. So the reason why we're getting 0 is that the location we've given it to spawn in is 0. So we need to tell it to spawn from where the player is. So for example, I could do, say, get actor location, which finds the player's current position, and plug in this yellow one here and compile that. And now when I fire, it will spawn them wherever the player is. But they're currently not moving, which is not really a good thing either. So we will fix that. Now, not quite as important, but I'm going to point it out because it's good to know, is you can also use get actor transform, which you'll notice this orange one again. So if you were to right click this and choose recombine struct pin, get this orange one back, you could plug this in, and this will give you the location, rotation, and scale of the player all in one thing. If we compile it and play it, you'll notice it works about the same, but the difference is that, say, if we had the player and we were to scale them up a bit, just going to put this option on so it does in small increments. So if I were to scale the player up, if I fire the bullets now they stay at the same size as relative to the player. So little details like that will affect it. I'm going to set that back down to 1, by the way, on each, so it resets. So we'll use that for now, that's fine. Okay, so the bullets aren't moving. Now that's because we never actually told the bullets to move. So we need to go back to the bullet, and then inside its event graph, we need to add logic for it to move. The logic for this is exactly the same as what we did for the enemy. So we're going to do set actor location, put that up here. We're going to plug in event tick to it. We're then going to do get actor location. such as here. And then we need to add to it, so such as vector plus vector. So we plug that into here, and then we can add some value to it, say it's moving up on 5, and plug that into here, and that will move it up a little bit on each frame. So if we compile that, play it, now bullets move up the screen. Now, similar to the enemy, it's useful to have like a variable to store this. So I'm just going to bring up the enemy again, and I'll just drag this tab up here now. So we had like a speed vector, if you recall. So we want to add this to the bullet as well. So if I go to the bullet, we're going to go variables. I'm going to call it speed, and then we're going to change the type to vector. Going to go to compile, and then we get our speed value here. Now, if you want to, you can give it a default value. I'm going to give it just 5 on Z. Then we can drag this over, choose get speed, and plug that into here. And now we have a speed variable to store it, which is useful. Let's just compile and test that also, see if that works. And that's working just fine. Now, we want to do something else here that we didn't do with the enemy. What we want to do is to say, okay, when we spawn a bullet, can we make it that we can change the speed when we spawn it from here? And the answer is yes. We just have to indicate to Unreal that we want to make this speed variable modifiable when we spawn it. So the way we do that is with speed selected here, in this details section, we want to tick instance editable, and we want to tick expose on spawn. Instance editable essentially means that we're allowed to edit it, I assume from different sources, and expose on spawn means that when we go to spawn it from, say, another actor, it will be available on the list of things we can modify. So once that's done, compile it, go back to the player, and let's just check. So I'm going to recompile that. No, that's not doing it. Okay, so just to kind of show this, what I normally do is if we just reselect the bullet on the list, see how now speed is available as an option on this spawn, and see how it is defaulted to 5. So if we wanted to, we could actually change the speed from the player as it shoots it, which is very, very useful. We'll leave it on the default for now, but that might be something that you can play with later. So let's compile it. I'm also going to save my bullet. By the way, a good thing to do every now and then is come back to the level and click this Save All button, and this will just give you a list of what you need to save, and you just go Save Selected. That's what I normally do. Alright, so now I've got the bullets, but of course none of them hit enemies at all. They just pass through them, and that's because we haven't told them what happens if they collide. And again, we have to tell the game basically everything about how it works. There are no assumptions, or not many assumptions made in game engines about how things should function, because you may want it to do it differently. Okay, so to start off with, we're going to start making a collision where when we collide with the player, when the player, collides with an enemy, we will destroy the enemy and we'll remove some health from the player. Then we'll deal with bullet collisions, because that's a little bit more tricky. So on the player, first of all, before I forget, I'm going to comment these because that's a good habit to do. So I'm going to just come through here and write when spacebar is pressed. Then I'm going to write over here, shoot bullet. And I'm going to write, say, pass player location, and we'll say shoot bullet from player. Okay, so let's quickly grab that, and then we'll we'll select all of it, right click in the empty space, search comment, and choose add comment to selection, so we get another one of these little boxes around it. Going to size it up. I'm going to write in here basically spacebar control. So that'll give us a pretty, or shooting control might be better actually. So I'll rename that to shooting control. That's just so we can remember it and what it does pretty easily. Again, we could change the color if we want, but I think that'll be fine. Now there's one other thing, I actually forgot to do it here, so we'll quickly make one extra modification to this and then we'll deal with collisions. Is that notice that when we play the game, the bullets are shooting from the middle of the player. Now why is that? Well, that's because if I select the player, notice how its movement controls come from the middle? And that's because that's where it considers it to where it kind of hinges from. So if we give it the player's position, it finds this position and then says, okay, I guess bullets fire from that position, and they just fire out from there. But that's not really what we want. Ideally, we would like it to, say, fire from the tip of the ship, or possibly from, say, the guns, which is something that you could do later. But for the sake of simplicity, we will go from the tip of the ship just to give you an idea. So let's erase all that. So how can we do that easily? Well, if we go to the player ship and go to the viewport, so we've added a couple of components here. We added a player flipbook and a sphere. Now, we can add some other things here to change it. Now, by the way, the system of this is a bit different than the enemy. Notice that the player flipbook is the root, and notice that the sphere is second. You can change it if you want. There's no reason why you couldn't, and we might just quickly do that now, because that was kind of an older way I used to do it. So I'm going to choose scene. I'm going to drag that over the player flipbook, make that the new root, and I'm going to rename it. Doing this makes it a little bit easier to make changes to the player ship, which you'll find later. We'll also rename this to sphere collision, just to keep it consistent. And I'm also going to add another component, and this is the one where we're going to make it shoot differently. I'm going to add another scene component, and I'm going to rename that to gun. And I'm going to drag that, say, let's put that here. I'm just going to say attach, and that means it's, well, actually I'll put it on flipbook, so I'll put it just here, so it's attached to the player flipbook, which means if we move the player flipbook, it'll move with it. So with gun selected, I have this little movement control, and I'm effectively moving this invisible point. So I'm going to place this, why don't we place it up here for now, just for the sake of example. I'm going to choose compile. If I go to the event graph, see, currently I'm using the player's current position, but what I could do instead is if I search and search for component, let's just see if I can find it. Let's search for component location. No, that's, oh, there we go. So see up the top, we have get world location gun. That's the one I'm looking for. So if I select that, notice how we get a node similar to this one, but now we have the gun component plugged into it. That means it's going to find the specific location of this gun position and use that. So if I instead, I'm going to remove that. I'm going to see if I can find a different one for a moment. So if I search for component transform, this is just going to give me the entire transform. So get world transform gun. I now get the kind of orange version of it, which is what I was using here. So if I remove this one and plug in this one instead and compile it, notice how if I press it now, it's shooting from that point on the outside that I indicated. And just to really illustrate it, if I selected that point again and say moved it over here, compiled it, play it again, see how it's shooting from there now. So that's really useful. That means that now I can just grab this point with the gun selected and just move it to wherever I want to shoot from on the ship, such as that, which will do better. Doesn't have to be perfect. I think that'll be fine. So now if I go to play, now bullets shoot right from the tip of the ship, which is useful. Okay, so just going to clean this up a bit. So I'm going to come back. I'm going to expand this so it includes that part. drag this over, and we're going to make a comment so I remember what this is doing. We're going to comment this and call it basically get gun component position. All right, so I'm just going to put that maybe there, make it a little bit neater. Okay, so now we've done that part, so now we can get back onto collisions. That was a little bit of a sidetrack, but it's useful to know. Okay, so let's go back to the player and making them collide with the enemy. So I'm going to go to the player ship's blueprint, and I'm going to come up and I'm going to talk about event actor begin overlap. So what this does is, I'm just going to write some of this down. So this event node checks whether the player's collision is overlapping with another. So effectively, if its sphere collision is overlapping with another sphere collision, get out my pen again. So say if the player who has his own like sphere collision going around the outside of him like this happens to collide with say an enemy, which I'll do like a little Y like that. If it happens to collide with their collision, say if these touch, then this one will trigger. That's what it describes. So let's erase all that. Now, there's another one called event actor on hit, which is similar, but this one is more using like a physics engine, and we aren't really using that here. So we're going to use this one. I'm going to move this out a little bit just so I can separate it from the others for a moment. And we're going to do a little test. I'm going to go to print string, which if you recall, we use a lot for testing. And I'm going to plug in this one here, which means when we overlap with an actor, we're going to print hello onto the screen. So we compile it, go to play. Let's just see if that works. So see how now when I hit enemies, it says hello, but it only does it when we immediately hit them. It doesn't like do it repeatedly. So it detects it once when we touch them. You know, it doesn't matter if we're still touching them. It just only has said it once. Now, another nice thing is if we plug in this one to here, it will convert this value into text, which is what this kind of purplish, pinkish one means. So now if I run to enemies, it will say what I've hit. It says enemy 3, enemy 7, enemy 8. So the different enemy names it gives back to me. So this is just to show that we can collide properly. All right, so now we're going to try and make something a bit more sophisticated. So if I say remove this, let's make it that when we hit the enemy, the player has health and it will lose health. But there's a problem. We actually don't have a way of tracking health for the player yet. It just hasn't been a thing we've needed to deal with. So we need to make a variable for that. We're going to click variable. We're going to call it health, and we're going to choose float. We're going to compile, and we're going to set the initial value to 100. So now what's going to happen is we're going to say, going to drag that over, choose get, going to drag over another one and choose set. We're going to say when we overlap with an enemy, we are going to take the player's current health and we're going to remove a certain amount off it. I'm going to choose float minus float. And so we can now say, okay, we get the current health. We remove, say, 10 from that health, and then set that to be the new health. We then plug this in here. So now we'll remove the player's health every time they run into the enemy. So if I choose print string, plug this into here so it converts that from a number into text, compile it. Now when we run into enemies, it should say at the top of the screen how much health the player has. So now it's moving this number downward. And now it's at 0. Now notice that the player doesn't get destroyed when they equal 0. And that makes sense. We haven't told it what to do when its health equals 0. So what we'd like to do is add a condition here that says when your health equals 0, we're going to remove your health. So we're going to delete the print string. We're going to choose compare float again. Like this. And then we're going to go to, what was it? Destroy actor is what we want. Okay, so the logic is we're going to take the health, delete this one, going to plug that into input. We're going to say compare it to the value 0. Very important to put that value in there. We're going to say if the player's health is less than or equal to 0, that's what this means. Is this equal, is this less than the number that we are comparing it to? So if it is either of these cases, we're going to destroy the player. So let's try that again. So if I go to play, so hitting a bunch of enemies, if I hit too many, my player gets destroyed. Now actually, that's not a good mechanism because there's a bit of a problem in this version of the game where if you delete the player, they it's kind of a thing where it kind of messes with the camera. So we're not going to destroy the player. Instead, what we'll do is we'll make them invisible. So I'm going to choose hide actor. So set actor hidden in game. So sorry, that shouldn't be that one. So we'll make it that when the player gets stunned by too many, we'll just hide the player for now. Oops, one other thing. For some reason that reset to nothing. So let's recompile that, play it. So now what'll happen is when we collide with the enemies, now the player should disappear. Let's try that again. I think I didn't hit quite enough. Okay, still going. I'm going to add some more enemies just to see what it is. So where are we? Okay, so I'm going to go to play level and I'm just going to add a bunch more enemies just so I can see that a bit more clearly. So I'm also going to put in a print string just to see how many enemies are coming down. Okay. So let's go back to here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do another print string, not prompt, that's a different thing. Print, we're going to plug this one into here, plug this one into here, then plug in this health value here. So that means that we will see the health as it goes down. So I'm aiming to get it to 0. Okay. I think I know what my error might be now. There we go. So it does get to 0. The problem is I never ticked this box. So I have to tick that box to make it hidden. So now if I do it, there we go. So now the player disappears. Now technically, by the way, you can still shoot bullets while invisible, so we will prevent that. But for now, we'll come back to that likely in the next tutorial, I think. I'll quickly just double check my reference, see if that was a thing. Okay. Yeah, that'll be okay for now. All right, so let's go to the, well, let's try shooting bullets through. Let's see what happens. So if I press play, notice if I shoot bullets, nothing is really happening yet. Now, it is possible you might have a certain error when you shoot the bullet and may remove health. That's because we haven't really distinguished collision types. We haven't really said, okay, how do you determine the difference between a bullet and an enemy when colliding? We haven't really done that. So we need to add another little mechanism. We need to determine which object we're colliding with. There are a couple of ways we can do this, but the easiest one is to go to, say, the enemy, and we're going to, with this part selected where it says enemy self, we're going to scroll down and choose, which one was it? We're going to select actor, and we're going to go to this section called tags. we're going to make a tag, and we're going to call it enemy. So this is effectively an enemy tag. It's a way that we can distinguish enemies when we hit them. Conversely, we're going to go to bullet, because we're going to set this up now to make it easier. We're going to select bullet self. We're also going to add a tag to this one called bullet and compile that. Now this last one isn't quite as important, but we're going to add it to be thorough. We're going to select player ship, go down to the bottom, go to actor, add a tag for this one too. We're going to call that player. Make sure you've selected this part of the top. If you select a different one, you'll either won't find it or what you add won't work. So it has to be player ship self is what we're looking for. Compile that too. So before doing all this bit where we remove health, we want to make it that we check which tag the object has before calculating it. So we're going to look for, I think it's has tag. There we go. Actor has tag is the one we want. It looks like this. So we start by plugging in other actor into here. We then write the tag we're looking for. So in this case, we're looking for enemy. We then do it again and we search for something called branch. If ever you've done programming, a branch is a lot like an if statement. So the idea is that we have a true or false condition. So just to type that in for a second. So this node here asks, does the player have this tag, which in this case is enemy. This is either true or false. It is only one of these two values. And that's what the red one means. We discussed that once before, that red means something is either true or false. So we plug this true or false value here into where it says condition. Now the point is, if it is true, it executes this sequence. If it is false, it executes this sequence. So what we want to make it is, if the enemy has this tag, then this will be true, in which case we only want to do these events if that is true. So if I compile it now, we should still be able to run into enemies and it should still remove health, which it does. Okay, so that's working pretty much fine for this one. So now we have the collision with the enemies going. I'm going to remove this print tag. I'm going to pull this across. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all these nodes, similar to what I did before, and I'm going to put them in a big comment box because it's really important to remember what these are doing. So we're going to right click, search comment, add comment to selection, like this. We're going to call this section enemy collision. I'm going to quickly run through and make comments on all this. So we're going to write here, when sphere collision, or basically when we collide would be better, with object, because again at this point we're just collecting when we collide with any other object with a collision. We're going to say here, check if object has enemy tag. I'm going to put enemy in quotes just to be clear that that's the one we've chosen. Basically branch logic based on whether this is true or false. So if true, then remove 10 from the player's health. If health is below 0, oh, actually, more specifically, we'll just say compare if health is below 0. If so. Hide the player. And I'm going to put in brackets temporary solution to removing the player. We'll come back to this one later and refine it to make it a bit better. Okay, so now we have comments for this. Just very quickly. So remove health, sorry, temp from health variable. And I'm going to just change this to basically set basically player's health is probably a better. So set new player health is more accurate to what it does. Okay, so that's a pretty good set of comments. So we've got everything going there. I might quickly change the color of this comment box just to make it a bit clearer. By the way, because this box is getting really bigger, if you want to undo that, just click this pin, and that means that it'll stay the same size. I'm going to select this box, going to just make it like, I don't know, maybe like a purple kind of color, just so we can differentiate sections a bit more easily. Going to choose compile. Okay, so now we've done this, we need to add collisions for the enemy. So when an enemy hits the bullet, they will get destroyed. All right, so let's go to the enemy for a moment. So we're going to basically do the same thing. We're going to do this on the enemy's node. So I'm going to drag this over here. We're going to do has tag. So again, we're checking if whatever we've collided with has the tag bullet. And then we're going to do, say, that's right, branch. So we want to now check the condition. So if this condition is true, we're going to flow out here, and then we're going to decide what happens. Now, if we choose, say, destroy actor, let's just have a look at the result. So if I compile that, yep, all good. Let's just have a play. So if I shoot the enemy, see how the bullet keeps going? In fact, if there are a couple of enemies in a row, that would just keep burning through all of them. We don't necessarily want it to do that. We want to make it that the bullet gets destroyed. So a trick we can do is see how on the destroy actor bit, there's this bit target, and it says self. By default, it will always do this action to itself. But if we plug in this other actor to here, that means it will destroy whatever other actor we have collided with. So if I choose to compile, play it. Now if I shoot the enemy, see how the bullets stop, but the enemies keep going, because now the bullets are getting destroyed. So what I can do here is I can just copy and paste this node again, plug another one in, and keep this as self. So the logic is destroy the bullet, then destroy the enemy. So now if I do it, now both get destroyed. And that works just fine. Now this isn't a requirement, but I'm going to show you how to do it if you want to deal with this. The enemy in this version just gets destroyed immediately. We want to, if you want, you can add like an enemy health value. So I'm going to add variables. I'm going to choose, I'm going to make that enemy health. And we're going to make that a float, compile it, set the enemy's health to say 100, and then we're going to put in the same nodes that we did before. So we're going to put in, say, float minus float, like here, drag that across, choose get, plug that into here, say minus, let's say 50, so it takes 2 bullets. We're then going to, drag over enemy health, choose set. And we're going to set this new value to this, plug in the new health. Then, that's right, we need to compare float. So let's do compare float here. Okay. So we're going to compare the current health, compare it with 0. If it is less than or equal to 0, we're going to destroy the enemy. Fairly straightforward. Now there is an error with this. I'm going to just pin that down for a second. Let's have a look at what happens. So if I shoot the enemy, see how the bullet keeps going until it shoots the deciding blow. That isn't really right, but why is that happening? It's got to do with where we've placed our nodes. So because, just going to get my pen out. Because we have placed this node, which destroys the bullet, after this one, it means that this only happens when the health is less than or equal to 0, which doesn't really make sense. It should actually happen in all cases. To do that, this node should be moved over to here so that it does this check, you know, before all of that happens. So the sequence again is really important. You need to get the right order to nodes. So I'm going to just break this connection. I'm going to break these two. I'm going to break this one. I'm going to drag this one over here, plug it into here, then into here. Then these two will go to this one instead. Compile it. Let's play it. And now see how it's working. Each enemy now takes 2 bullets. By the way, notice that we can destroy the enemy, I meant to say. Now, essentially, the player is linked to the camera, the enemy is not, which means we can destroy the enemy. So we have this kind of workaround for the player, but we don't need to do that for the enemy themselves. But we will talk about that and dealing with that likely in the next tutorial. Now, another question that people have is, say, yes, the enemy is disappearing, but, you know, why isn't the enemy, like, exploding when we shoot them? And that's because we haven't told it to explode. So we're going to do that in the next tutorial, and we're also going to add HUD elements in the next tutorial. I will see you then.